Entering the new century, the band decided they wanted to move in a completely different direction from Nightfall. This is because the band have never wanted to stay the same, which can be seen throughout their entire career. The band decided that for this album, they wanted to go in a much more progressive and epic direction with their songwriting, with much more complex and sprawling compositions. For the first time, Andre recorded from his new home studio, as getting to the main studio was a big time investment for him. The distance between him and Hansi during the songwriting phase meant that the process took a lot longer than it usually did, which wasn't helped by the complexity of the new songs. The band recorded the album in the new Twilight Hall studios, which would become home base for all the band's future recordings. Also, the band teamed up with Charlie Bauerfeind, who would not only help in the recording of Nightfall, but also worked on albums for Angra, Helloween, and Gamma Ray. Overall, the band consider it their most ambitious album to date, with not only the songwriting, but also the production. The production is said to have about 200 tracks in it, which calls for a very overblown production. This has been noted by Tommen in subsequent interviews, as he finds the album and the songwriting was way too overproduced and complex. Personally, this is one of my main issues with the album, as the guitars are often buried with orchestra and choir pieces. This can cause a band to lose some of their identity in my personal opinion, and takes away the heaviness of tracks that would sound a lot better with a more stripped down production. However, while the production does take away from some of my enjoyment on this album, a lot of the songwriting is still top tier. Precious Jerusalem is a great way to open the album, showing the band going for a more epic sound, but in a way I really like, with a great signature Blind Guardian anthemic chorus. Battlefield has some nice speed to it, showing the band still have their heavy moments on this album. Sadly Sings Destiny has some great drum work on it, with some absolutely ripping guitars, and one of my favourite of the band's choruses with Hansi putting in a great performance. He hits some crazy high notes on this song, and it makes the song feel grand and awesome. However, this album does have a couple songs that I don't really care for much. The Maiden and the Minstrel Night for me feels very non-essential and quite boring personally. Wait for an Answer is played with the overproduction, which just makes the song sound so busy at times it's hard to concentrate on a single part, with so many layering vocals and instruments. However, this album really pulls it back for the end. Punishment Divine is one of my favourite Blind Guardian songs. It brings some much needed grit to the album, with some of the fastest drumming on any album. Also, the chorus with the alternating vocals really take use of the album's choral production. While I think the live versions show this song better, without the busy production, the original version is still an absolutely amazing time. The centerpiece of this album, and arguably of the band itself, is And Then There Was Silence. It's the band's longest and most ambitious song, and they absolutely hit it out of the park. It's clear to see that this was the song the production was built around, as it takes full advantage of the lush orchestra, but still allows the guitars to come in. The song never gets boring as they are always throwing new parts at you. Based on ancient Troy, it tells a story and leaves you absolutely captivated for the entire time. Song experiments with different tempos, sounds, and Hansi has one of his best vocal performances of his entire career. This song has become one of the fanbase's absolute favourites, and even released as the debut single for the album, showing how confident the band were in it. This deserves all the love it gets, and is still one of my favourite songs the band would ever do. Overall, this album kept up the streak for the band of being a critical darling. It was the band's first album to be released day in day in America with the rest of the world, leading for it to have a surge in popularity there. While a lot of the fanbase loved the new direction and songs, there was a portion of the fanbase that were and still are not a fan of the overblown production, finding that it went too far away from the band's roots. The band would do heavy touring for the album and release both a live album and DVD called Live and Imaginations Through the Looking Glass respectively. They were recorded at the band's own Blind Guardian Festival, which they held as no festival could handle the band's high requirements. The setlist would be voted on by fans, which led to a mix of commercial and fan favourites. In my opinion, a lot of the songs from A Night at the Opera have their definitive versions here, with a much more raw and heavy production, with Punishment Divine being the best example of this. But with cracks starting to form with the band and their want to be more ambitious with the songwriting and musicality, how would this affect them down the line, as very soon the rock-solid lineup would show that it could fracture. After the long tour for A Night at the Opera, the band decided to take a long break from touring as they worked on their live album and DVD. Before the recording of the next album, the band parted ways with longtime drummer Tom N. Stouch due to musical differences. Tom N. was not a fan of the more symphonic and epic direction the band were going in, which was clear with his disdain for the production on A Night at the Opera, and so would leave the band to keep good personal relationships with them. The band would take on drummer Frederick M.K., who is still the drummer to this day. Unlike Oliver Holsworth, he would come on as a full-time member and not just a session musician. While the songwriting once again took quite a long time, the actual production of the album went quite smoothly for once, with nothing all too crazy going on. The band was forced to delay the album by a couple months, however, due to Hansi getting ill just before they were set to wrap up production, but apart from that, it was pretty smooth sailing. For this album, the band wanted to go for a much more straightforward direction, with shorter songs and a stripped-back production. Overall, I really liked the approach to this album, as it meant the band focused on making the songs with catchy hooks and fun melodies, rather than just to pile everything into songs like they had done on the album before. The song Turn the Page is a good example of this, with an absolutely infectious melody. It's not to say the band have thrown away the more anthemic parts completely. The opener, This Will Never End, has a great anthemic chorus to it, as well as some great verses and a very cool solo. It works really well live too, with the crowd often joining into the chorus. Motherland also has more layered backing vocals to it, but they are used much smarter than they were on the previous album, with this album also eliminating a lot of the more orchestral elements that really plague A Night at the Opera for me. It's an amazing song that I wish more of the fanbase took notice of. The band still experiment quite a bit on this album, with Fly being a great example of it. This sounds like nothing the band has done before or since. One of their catchiest songs ever, with great drumming and hooks to die for. It's still one of my absolute favourite songs by them, and easily my favourite song on this album.
No one ever dares to speak, it's nothing else but fantasy. One day
Blessed Home is a great anthemic song, and Lionheart shows the band at its catchiest with so many cool grooves and melodies that will be stuck in your head for days on end. Straight Through the Mirror is also one of my favourites, with an absolutely infectious chorus that won't get out your head. The melody of it just makes me want to dance too, it's so groovy. Scouts and Shadows brings back the idea of an acoustic song on the album, and this one arguably being their best. The layered vocals add so much emphasis when they are put on, and Hansi has an amazing vocal performance, sounding like he's telling you a story around a campfire at night.
Songs I will sing of runes and rings. Just hand me my harp. This night turns into myth. Nothing seems real. You soon will feel the world we live in is another scar's dream in the shadows. Dream in the shadows.
The other single for the album is also one of the band's best, Another Stranger Me. The band made a video for it, and it features some of the best melodies they would ever do, as well as Andre laying down one of his absolute best solos. I know I keep saying this, but Hansi's voice is just so good on this, with him having great soft and intense moments on the song. That might have the best vocal performance of his entire career. My only issue with this album is I feel like the last two songs are a bit fillerish. Not bad, but nothing I would really go out of my way to play, and leave the album with a bit of an anticlimax of the ending, but overall it does little to diminish my enjoyment of this album. While when I first listened to it I didn't really like the more straight ahead and arguably generic style, it's grown to be one of this album's biggest strengths. After such an ambitious album before, it was good for Blind Guardian to ground themselves on this album. The songs are catchy and a good length, and this is one of the Blind Guardian albums I come back to the most. With the band at a high point, would they be able to carry on this momentum to the next album? Or would they try too hard and falter like they've done before? After a nearly 2-year tour and break, the band reconvened into the studio to record their 9th studio album. While A Twist in the Myth had been successful, it was clear the fan reaction wasn't as positive as it had been before, likely due to the album not being as progressive as the ones before it. However, the band said the songwriting for the new album wasn't made to please fans who didn't like the past album, as the band had always gone ahead and done what they wanted to do. For the first time in the band's life, they played shows during the writing process for the next album. They said that this made the songs have more energy to them due to having a live feeling while writing. This was the first writing session to include Frederick MK, as he joined the band after the songs for A Twist in the Myth had been written, and he contributed to the drum compositions for this album. And wanted this album to be a lot more varied than previous albums, featuring elements of all eras of the band. This means that the album has both thrashy songs as well as more progressive and symphonic songs on it. For a couple of the songs, they brought in a full orchestra to beef up the songs even more. This includes the song Sacred Worlds, which was released 2 years before the rest of the album as part of the game Sacred 2 Fallen Angel, where they also did some voice work for the game. The song is great too, being grand and epic and a great first impression to the new album. The 2 years of songwriting would be well worth it, with At the Edge of Time being another slam dunk of an album. The aforementioned Sacred Worlds works so well as an opener, with the anthemic and epic sound. The real orchestra makes such a difference for this song, adding to the grand scale, but it doesn't go overboard like the stuff on A Night at the Opera. Songs like Tanalorn and Ride into Obsession show this band going back to their earlier, more thrashy sound, with the former having Hansi hitting some incredible highs. It has ripping guitar leads from Andre, and easily one of the best on the album. Ride into Obsession is just as good, with an incredibly aggressive vocal performance on it. The lead work on this is also amazing, and showed this band can still go heavy when they really want to. Curse My Name and War of Thrones are good for being the acoustic songs on the album, with the latter having some great piano work on it. Has a slower tempo but an uplifting chorus and shows the variety this album has. Curse My Name is a lot faster, which is a good change up for these types of songs that Blind Guardian have been doing ever since the early 90s. The way the song builds with all the instruments makes it have such a great climax and a really memorable song. The end of the album also features with some of the heaviest songs, with Control the Divine having some great chugging on it. The solo shows off Andre's great guitar tone on this album, and MK has some really interesting drumming here, showing how much of a benefit he's been to the band. The melodies in this song are incredible, which is right up my alley, as when this band have great melodies they can hardly be beaten. Voice in the Dark, which was released as a single, has great melodies and catchy riffs on it. I love the guitar solo, and the chorus with the backing vocals is no doubt one of the band's best. Easily a modern classic that will be remembered as one of the band's best for years to come. The band were going for a classic sound on this song, and they absolutely hit it out of the park. The final song is easily the most ambitious, with an oriental sound. Wheel of Time is epic, with it being one of the songs with full orchestra on it. It's a long song but never overstays its welcome, still has some amazing grit to it. It's a great way to close the amazing album, and adds on to this band's collection of absolutely incredible closers. Overall, I think that At the Edge of Time is arguably this band's most underrated album, on par with A Twist in the Myth, which I think is just as underrated. A lot of people complain that this album is way too orchestral, but I think that's unfair as the album has plenty of heavier moments to it. The variety is what always made this band so good to me, and this album shows it off very well. Also, this has a great production to it, as the band have learned how to do orchestral and symphonic compositions without just piling everything in together which buries the guitars. If you haven't given this album a chance, I highly recommend going back and giving it a listen, as it went well under the radar for most Blind Guardian fans. However, the next album would show this band going for their most experimental album since A Night at the Opera. But would they fall into the same traps that they did back then, or will they have learned from their past mistakes?
Let this fire burn. Sail until you reach the promised land. We are ground in the fifth dimension, the night wave. I can feel it's coming, the night wave.
After the tour for At the Edge of Time, the band were set to record their 10th album. The recording for the new album went smoothly as it had been for the past couple, with the band once again wanting to go in a much more progressive and symphonic direction. They enjoyed the use of orchestra on the last album, and wanted to use it more for the new one. They also experimented with new instruments, such as Andre using a 7-string guitar for the first time, and the use of larger choirs for the album. They also wanted the album to be a concept album, carrying on the story from the last couple songs of Imaginations from the Other Side, such as Bright Eyes, with the story being of what happens when the child, now older, actually goes through the mirror to the other side. Overall, it's a very loose concept. You don't really need to know the story to enjoy the album, but it's nice for them to try something like this again. Songs on Beyond the Red Mirror go for a much grander style than any Blind Guardian album had before, with the opener showing this right away. It has a very anthemic chorus and the choirs to open the song, showing the new direction the band will be going in for this album. It's a good song, but suffers from a lot of issues that will plague this album, being way too long for no real reason, just repeating itself over and over again. Also, the production isn't great, feeling muffled with weird techno elements that don't really fit. These issues can be seen especially well on At the Edge of Time, where the symphonic and orchestral elements can sometimes get so overpowering you can barely hear the guitars. The song goes on for way too long and the production is so busy, it's often hard to lock in on one element, which causes it to almost become disorientating. The whole album isn't like this, however, because there are some songs on here that do have a heavier feel to them. Twilight of the Gods has a crushing opening riff, and while the production does take away from how heavy the song should be, it still hits with quite a heavy punch. The solo on this song is excellent, and Hansi has a very gritty vocal performance, which is what I want to hear from Blind Guardian. The Holy Grail is probably my favourite song on here, with more great heavy riffing. It's got great speed to it, and it's nice to have heavier songs on this album, specifically when it's filled with so much orchestral parts. It's good to have a song that sounds more like classic Blind Guardian. Also, has an absolutely killer solo on it. No matter what the album is, Andre always lays down some great lead work. However, this album is pretty boring and the production does nothing to help it. I don't hate the grandness of the album in concept, but the way they went through with it just does nothing for me personally. Songs like Sacred Mind and The Throne are just way too overproduced, with lengths that just go on and on way too long and being quite boring if I'm being completely honest. Even the final song, which the band are usually good at doing, just isn't anything special. Has a nice build to it, but won't stick in your head at all. I would really like to see a remix of this album, because I think there's a lot of potential for a good album here, but the production really takes away any of my enjoyment from it. It reminds me a lot of A Night at the Opera, but without any moments which make the grand and epic production feel necessary. A heavier production would have been a lot better for this album, especially if the guitars were higher in the mix, as they're usually drowned out by the sheer amount of layers on this album. Personally, this is by far my least favourite Blind Guardian album, and I don't really go back to any songs. It's unfortunate, because I can tell the band really did try, and I know it has its fans, but I don't see anything special personally. During the tour for this album, the band will record the Live Beyond the Spheres album. It will be released in 2017, and have a good list of songs, with the songs that were on the album sounding much better here than on the original. This is the same reason as Night at the Opera songs on Live, as they aren't held back from the overlaid production that ruins my enjoyment of it on the original album. It would also include some gems that they didn't play too often, such as And Then There Was Silence and The Last Candle, which I would do absolutely anything for them to bring back into the setlist, as they can still play it as good as they used to. In 2019, Hansi and Andre would form the Twilight Orchestra and release the orchestral album Legacy of the Darklands. I'm not including this as a proper album, as it is seen as something different, and Marcus doesn't even appear on it. It's a far departure from even the Red Mirror, with no guitars even being present on the album. As such, it doesn't really do much for me, being overlong and emphasizing the orchestral elements I already wasn't a fan of on the Red Mirror. It was a passion project that had been in the band's minds since the mid-90s, so it was good it finally came out. Personally, however, it isn't anything special and doesn't sound particularly like Blind Guardian, and I can't really see myself ever going back to it. However, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant. During this part of the retrospective especially, I have complained a decent amount about the production on some of these albums, but also brought up the fact that a lot of the fans just like to sort of shit on them. The reason is they complain that after Nightfall, this band went in a direction that was way too symphonic and epic, losing the heaviness. Now, it might just be me, but that is almost objectively incorrect. Out of the last 4 albums, only 2 have been made predominantly up of symphonic music. Twist and the Myth is much more just a classic metal album, and while Edge of Time does have some orchestral elements, it also has some of the absolute heaviest moments ever. A reason people say this is also because of Tommen leaving, citing his disdain for the new direction. While I agree about this on Night of the Opera, I find it weird he says this when they were in the middle of writing Twist in the Myth. You're telling me that songs like Another Stranger Me is symphonic and light? The next album has some songs that are even heavier, with Tanalorn and Ride into Obsession being this band return to the earlier speed metal sound. However, this is also dismissing the fact that the band were not symphonic or proggy for any of the 90s. Both Imaginations and Nightfall were made to be more symphonic and epic than the albums before it, but the fans were fine with that, so why is this such a crime they kept evolving in the natural direction it was clear they were going? The band has had a massive amount of variety ever since Somewhere Far Beyond in 1992, so why is it so bad they kept doing that? In almost every interview I have read or watched for this retrospective, they always say they wanted the new album to sound completely different than the one before. So why are fans surprised they kept changing with each album? It wasn't like the band just kept getting more and more orchestral, because At the Edge of Time has some of the heavier stuff on it. My point is to say that people can dislike these albums if they really want to, but I find the argument the band just lost their heaviness or went too overboard with orchestral elements on albums like Edge of Time when this just isn't true. However, no matter what I think, it's quite clear the fans wanted to return to the heavier stuff, and the band got all their orchestral things out of their body with both Legacy of the Darkland and the Red Mirror, because the next album will not only be the heaviest one since the 90s, but one of the heaviest albums of their entire career. The band began writing music for the upcoming album straight after the tour for the Red Mirror. However, while a few songs did come in these writing sessions, a lot of the songs came about after the recording of the Twilight Orchestra, which writing was paused to do that. Because of this, the band got a lot of their orchestral energy out, and felt a lot more inclined to write heavier and faster music. They wanted to make a brutal album, and were given a lot more time to do so due to a certain world-changing event I won't mention happening at the same time, leaving them more time to focus on the songs as they weren't having to tour. This would be a new chapter in Blind Guardian's life, moving away from the more orchestral and symphonic leanings that the band felt like they had been doing for a while. Overall, this was a good thing for many fans, as many thought the band were moving way too far away from their roots of speed metal. Due to the new style of music, the band completely changed the way they were recording, which led to the new album having a very different sound than the one before it. This, at least in my opinion, is a very good thing, as the production on the last album was my main issue with it. The new sound can be heard right from the beginning, with one of the band's best openers ever, Deliver Us from Evil. The band returned to their almost speed metal early sound, with the guitars being absolutely ripping. Hansi also sounds the best he's done in about 2 decades. He has a rasp in his voice that was absent on some previous albums, and it adds to the classic sound this album has. Violent Shadows is another great example of the heavier sound, as well as the band showing their absolutely amazing knowledge in how to do a great chorus. The backing vocals are awesome, and it's so catchy.
Save us, set us free. Sky dancer, down where the violence
However, the songs that were written before the orchestral album do have a more anthemic and proggy sound to them. Life Beyond the Spheres and Architects of Doom are both slower paced songs, but still have a good amount of crunch and heaviness to them. They remind me a lot of the more proggy songs from albums like Imaginations and Nightfall, and Charlie Ballfiend has really improved on his production, giving these songs the added kick they need to make them sound more like classic Blind Guardian stuff. My favourite of the more grand songs on this album is Secrets of the American Gods. Halsey puts one of the best vocal performances on the album, and I really like the changes that the vocal melodies go through in the verses. They will build to one of the best Blind Guardian choruses of this century, with the amazing backing vocals, and Andre's solos are amazing as always. Let It Be No More is an amazing ballad with a great anthemic chorus, Damnation is a crushing song with some of Andre's best lead playing, and Destiny is an awesome closer, with some crushing doomy guitars that make for it to be an absolutely memorable closer. The best song on this album by far for me, however, is Blood of the Elves. This really feels like it comes from any of the first albums, with so much speed and crunch in the guitars. The verses are awesome, and the chorus is one of the band's best of all time. Halsey apparently wanted to make it more epic, but Andre shot down that idea, keeping it catchy and snappy. It's a good thing he did, because it made for one of the best Blind Guardian songs of their entire career. Overall, The God Machine is an absolutely incredible return to form after Beyond the Red Mirror was a bit of a misstep for me. The band went in a far heavier direction while not completely ditching some of the more anthemic sides, and it makes for an album that has lots of variety to it while keeping to the band's roots. It's not just pandering to the classic sound either, but evolving it into making something new, and if this is the direction the band are planning on going into, then I think we could be entering a new golden age for the band. It was received very well by Blind Guardian fans, who praised the return to the heavier sound. The band would tour for this album, and this is where I'd see them for the first time. Yep, that's me right there, right at the front. As of recording this video, the band have just wrapped up their US tour and planning on recording an album sooner rather than later, but no release date or anything has been confirmed. If it's anything like this album, however, then I am absolutely excited to see what direction this band could be going into. Overall, I think it's pretty clear to see that Blind Guardian are one of my absolute favourite bands of all time. They have one of the most solid discographies in all of music, and even if I have my fair share to complain with albums like A Night at the Opera and The Red Mirror, they still have a lot to like about them. But overall, I love how this band have evolved over the years, from the raw speed metal to the rich experimentation and the more symphonic parts of the 2000s. Apart from the first two, no two albums sound alike, and it makes for one of the most refreshing and re-listenable group of albums ever. They are a classic and underrated band in my opinion, and should be seen on the same pedestal as bands like Metallica and Iron Maiden. Halsey, Andre and Marcus have laid out some of the best metal for the past 40 years, and I hope this band have more years in them, because it's clear their best days are not past them. If you did enjoy this retrospective, please do like and subscribe, as I'm probably going to do more of these. But for now, it's time to say goodbye, my friends.